His former poet laureate Natasha Trethewey wrote, "Here too for the Confederacy an obelisk, oblivious in its name, a word that also meant the symbol to denote in ancient manuscripts the spurious, corrupt, or doubtful. At its base, forged in concrete, a narrative of valor, virtue, states' rights." That is from the poem Meditation at Decatur Square in a collection titled Monument. 2 weeks ago, the monument she wrote of came down, along with dozens of others across the country. Now, another longtime symbol of the Confederacy is being removed from Trethewey's home state of Mississippi. Last week, the Mississippi State Senate voted to remove the Confederate battle flag from the state's flag. Pulitzer Prize winner Natasha Trethewey joins us now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You wrote in the New York Times that you never thought you'd see this moment in your lifetime. Back in 2001, nearly 2/3 of Mississippians voted to keep the Confederate battle flag. What do you think made this time different?
Well, I mean, there's so much going on in the country and around the world, highlighting what the Black Lives Matter movement has been asking for, what African Americans have been asking for centuries. There's obviously that outpouring of support, but of course there's also the thing that gets changes made, and it's not just that attitudes are changing, but corporate interests, the SEC or the NCAA. It's one of the reasons that the flag in the state of Georgia changed, because of corporate interests, but it's a start.
Your background, I'm sure, has a lot to do with your view on these monuments. You are biracial. Your parents traveled from Kentucky to Ohio so that they could be legally married. How has that shaped your view of these symbols and these monuments that you grew up around in the South?
Well, I mean, growing up Black and biracial in Mississippi, in a place where not only was my parents' marriage illegal, but I was rendered illegitimate in the eyes of the law, born on Confederate Memorial Day. My mother understood very well what my life was going to be like in a place that was constantly sending messages to me as I was growing up about second-class citizenship and knowing my place.
I'm sorry, you said you were born on Confederate Memorial Day?
That's right. 100 years to the day celebrated.
What is that like in Mississippi? I mean, what's this? That's got to be a little odd having your birthday and this other celebration at the same time.
Well, that's right. But in Mississippi, and even in the state of Georgia, where I grew up, the flags were out in full force. You would see not only the state flag with its representation of the Confederate battle flag as part of it, but then you'd also see the Confederate flag itself, and it was an overwhelming message.
We're seeing the footage of that previous flag from Mississippi being taken down from the state capitol. Now, last night, President Trump did not specifically mention Confederate flags or statues, but he clearly referred to this debate over which icon should stay and which should go. Let me get your reaction to this part of what he said.
That is why we pay tribute to generations of American heroes whose names have etched on our monuments and memorials and in the pages of history and in the hearts of a very grateful people. We will never allow an angry mob to tear down our statues, erase our history, indoctrinate our children, or trample on our freedoms.
Natasha, in your view, do these monuments have to come down? Are there other ways to put them in their proper historical place without destroying them, without removing them?
Well, I mean, I think that they belong in museums, but let me just say, the monuments that have been etching these names on our landscape, the Confederate monuments tell only part of the story, a selected history. Just imagine if the southern landscape were dotted with monuments to the nearly 200,000 African American soldiers who fought in the Civil War to preserve our Union and also for their own freedom and won. That would be a very different message that we'd be learning about our shared collective history as Americans, not the fiction that the Confederacy tells us on monuments that say valor, virtue, states' rights, and not white supremacy and also the preservation of slavery. If we told the truth about history, that's what those monuments would say.
Before I let you go, since you mentioned fictions and museums, I should ask you about one other thing regarding the Confederate battle flag. There is one last Dodge Charger of the General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard. There's one in existence. It's on display at a museum called the Volo Auto Museum in northern Illinois. The owner says people love to see it. They haven't complained about it. It's part of history, and they're going to keep it in the collection. Before I let you go, briefly, for people who don't feel that visceral reaction that many people of color feel when they see that flag, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd say learn more about history. I mean, the point of having monuments and inscribing our landscape is to tell a fuller version of our shared history as Americans. And I think that when white Americans don't get the full story, when they get a fiction, it is harmful. It is a false and incomplete narrative. I think that they'd like to get a narrative of our shared history of true valor and virtue.
By the way, I think it is worth noting that there is also a push to remove the carving of Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson from Stone Mountain in Georgia. There was a protest yesterday with armed demonstrators, black men, demanding that it come down. Former U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey. Natasha, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for making time for us. Up next, a special edition of KCDC. Casey Hunt speaks with historians John Meacham, Eddie Glaude Jr., and Doris Kearns Goodwin about this precarious moment in U.S. history. I will see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, but until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Stick around. KCDC is next on MSNBC.
History in the making. As the nation celebrates Independence Day, we reckon with one of the most volatile chapters in American history. I'm joined by John Meacham, Eddie Glaude Jr., and Doris Kearns Goodwin to talk about our precarious national moment. Plus, John Barry, author of the for coronavirus, and a picture of the president walking off Marine One after a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, looking defeated after addressing a crowd that was far smaller than expected. And of course, there's also this one of him holding up a Bible upside down outside of St. John's Church after police cleared out peaceful protesters so he could walk there across Lafayette Square from the White House. That as images of demonstrations sparked by the police-involved deaths of Black Americans continued to pour in from across the nation. And add to that images of Confederate statues being defaced or torn down soon after that. It feels almost as though we have lived through a decade of history in just the past 6 months. And this Independence Day weekend, America is a country that's divided, a country that's angry, a country that's on edge. And according to a vast majority of Americans surveyed in new polls, it's also a country that's not moving in the right direction and not moving toward becoming a more perfect union. With that, I'd like to welcome in my panel presidential historian, Rogers Distinguished Professor at Vanderbilt University and an MSNBC contributor, John Meacham. He is the author of the forthcoming biography of John Lewis, His Truth is Marching On. And we also have chairman of Princeton Center for African American Studies and an MSNBC contributor, Eddie Glaude Jr. He is the author of Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on the program on this Independence Day weekend. And John Meacham, let me start with you for kind of the broad historical picture. I mean, I couldn't help thinking, sitting down tonight, that Independence Day is typically a time when we celebrate the country and everything that its achievements meant when the country was originally founded, all of the ways in which it was different, a new political experiment. But this year, I think we're grappling very much with the original sin of slavery when the country was founded, and also with an incredible test of leadership and questions about whether this president is ceding the role that America has played in the world, perhaps since the founding, but certainly since the end of the Second World War. Where do you see things right now in your historical sweep?
Well, I think that's a good summary. My sense is the degree to which you celebrated the 4th of July from 1776 forward has depended on who you were. It has not been a universal American celebration because there were so many people who were excluded from the original compact, from the sentence that Jefferson wrote that was adopted by the Continental Congress on this date in 1776, that all men were created equal and were endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Well, we didn't act as though all men were created equal. Women, John Adams had rejected his wife's advice to remember the ladies when they were forming the new government. Obviously, African Americans, obviously Native Americans. And so the whole story of the country has been one in which the meaning of that definition has been expanded. It has not been expanded quickly enough. It hasn't been expanded fully even now. But that is, at its best, that's the story of the country. And so the 4th of July should always be celebrated with a sense of humility, with a sense that, yes, this is what Jefferson and Lincoln and Reagan in various formulations refer to as the last best hope of man on earth, or the world's best hope. But hope is the key word. Hope is not necessarily reality. And so I think where we are is for all the external and ambient unhappiness and disappointment, more Americans today, more white Americans, more folks who look like me, are more aware than we were last 4th of July of the injustices that have to be addressed in order to truly create a more perfect union. And that's not cant, it's not a homily, it's not a fireworks speech. It is the reality of history, is that we are imperfect, and we have to do the best we can to bring the promise of the country from the ideal to the real.
Eddie Glaude Jr., what's your view of that? I mean, are we as a country right now in a position to try and take more steps toward the progress that Jon Meacham describes? Or do you feel as though the rest of this year is more bleak than that?
Well, I think it's uncertain. We are in an inflection point, and choices have to be made. John and I basically agree on the frame. We have different emphases. We come at it from different angles in some ways. I tend to inhabit the spaces of those who were excluded. So I'm always thinking about the 4th of July in at least two historical contexts. One is that, just as John said, the 4th of July wasn't a holiday for everyone, obviously. In fact, before it became a national holiday, it was the day that the American Colonization Society used to raise money in order to ship former slaves and black people out of the country. Ironies of all ironies, yes? And then there's the other moment, I think, that always comes to mind, and that is, of course, Frederick Douglass's famous July 5th, 1852 address. What is to the slave the 4th of July? And we could talk about the content of that historic speech where he highlights the contradictions of the country and then ends with this hopeful rhetoric about the possibilities of the country. But we have to think about the decade that, it's the 1850s, 2 years after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which nationalized the question of slavery, which said that any runaway slave could be retrieved no matter if he or she was in a free state, and it federalized. It made the government responsible, the federal government responsible for retrieving that lost property. And so there's always this contradiction at the heart of the country, Casey, and we're experiencing it right now. And the question for us, and John has asked it beautifully in his own work and makes the point, I think, right now. The question is, what will we do in the face of that contradiction or those contradictions now? There's no guarantee that we will make the best choice. We have some promising developments, but we will see what we will do.
Eddie, I mean, what are the steps that we need to take to try and continue to walk on the correct direction on a path to being a better country for everyone that we live among, and for justice for all?
I think it requires a kind of honesty about who we've been what we've done and who we aspire to be. We are oftentimes kind of caught, Casey, in as Dr. King would say, or as he said, a poisonous fog of lies. And part of what we have to do is tell the truth about the kind of society we have built and what we aspire to be as a nation. And to do that together, where black people and women and Native peoples, all Americans, can think of the country as theirs, not as latecomers or as recipients of charity. What can we do? First, we have to tell the truth. That becomes the ground for reconciliation. And then that becomes the basis for repair. We have to build a country that's just. Not just, it's not about perfect union. We have to work for a more just society. And I think John would agree with me. That's what we actually mean when we say a more perfect union.
John Meacham, look.
I want to weigh in on what they're talking about right here. First of all, it's one thing to think it. It's one thing to talk it. And it's another thing to live it. We have a generation of children growing up right now called the millennials. Probably over half of those children growing up right now are basically a fatherless society. They have no earthly idea towards who their true father is. And those that do know who their father is, the majority of them don't have a relationship with their father. So you basically got a generation of children growing up in a society right now that is already misfits, are considered misfits from the time that they was born and come into an existence. You got people out there that don't feel like that they have ever give a damn to the rest of the rich society because they wasn't born privileged with a father and a mother, or they wasn't born privileged of being on the right side of the railroad track to begin with, as far as having money. So you're dealing with a completely different entity pertaining to the children that has recently been born in the past 25, 30 years that are now getting old enough to speak their minds about how that they view this type of injustice that not only occurred during the slavery era, but also is still occurring to this day. That's the reason why that you have the 1%ers going up against the 99%ers, is because they realize that these rich, powerful people are not going to come off of their pocketbooks. They're not going to come off of their purses. They can talk all the talk that they want inside these churches, but the fact of the matter is they're greedy, selfish people. Now, there's no doubt, looking on the flip side, there's some of those millennials that have got such of an attitude and such of an ego problem towards feeling like that the world owes them a living, that they should be able to get everything free, have mishandled their visions or their ideals towards what the true concept is of the Constitution, the freedom to pursue happiness, as far as you got to earn it and work for it. There's a certain group of people out there, a certain group of those young millennials and even beyond the millennials, that believe that the world owes them a freaking living. And I've always been taught growing up, the world don't owe you nothing, son. The world don't owe you nothing. The world is a cruel, harsh, indifferent, cold place to be in. And of course, we have seen those exchanges unravel, and we have seen those exchanges materialize, evolve to what they are today. And of course, whenever you have the pandemic crisis that basically just added the cherry on top, as far as taking away what people already was striving towards having, you have a formula of a catastrophe boiling right here in America between now and the election that could actually evolve into something horrible. I mean, just this weekend alone, they've had just a little less than 100 shootings in Chicago alone. And this is the 4th of July. This is the independent time that we're supposed to be celebrating our freedom, celebrating our independence. And just in one city alone, in Chicago alone, that had a little less than 100 shootings. As of this morning, there was 13 dead, including one small child. And that's just in one town. That's just in one city. So you tell me what's going on pertaining to people having all these mixed emotions and feeling bitter and hate about what is going on. And of course, whenever they turn the news on, they listen to a chief and commander that's out of touch with reality towards what's actually going on. And then they hear remarks, well, we're $25 trillion in debt, and there's almost 3 million people incarcerated in jails. And there's no doubt a lot of these wealthy, rich people have almost purposely allowed for society to become dumbfounded or become broke or poor to the point that they have to become scavengers. And then once they become scavengers, they get punished for being scavengers. And the only difference between a rich scavenger and a poor scavenger is that a rich scavenger still has the system playing in his behalf, his or her behalf, to the point that ordinarily the rich scavengers cover each other's back. And if one of them was to get caught doing something extraordinarily wrong or extraordinarily bad, they still have enough money to represent themselves in a properly form to the point that the majority of them can get out of it scot-free. That's the difference between the rich scavengers and the poor scavengers. The poor scavengers don't have a chance unless they can get away with stealing that boat, or get away with stealing that diamond, or get away with stealing that RV, or get away with this, or get away with that. So the system has collapsed upon to itself. The system is broken, and the reason why is because of all the selfishness and the greed. These young kids, do you not think that they can see what the older class is driving? How that they've got all these nice cars and nice boats, and they live in these nice homes? Some of these people are drawing more money in their retirement than I have ever made in my entire life working in a good, sound occupation. Some of them are drawing $4,000 or $5,000 a month off retirement funds and retirement annuities. They got it better now in being retired than they ever thought about. Do you think that the millennials can't see that? Sure they can. They see it, they understand it, and they understand the basic roots of it. In other words, greed, greed, greed. What's mine is mine, and it's never going to be yours. That's the type of society that we live in. They talk about a perfect union. You know, what's going to make a perfect union a perfect union? Is it going to be that everybody has the same opportunity at the slice of the pie? Or is it going to be whenever some of these rich people that has these boats and these yachts and these 2 or 3 homes and these big bank accounts decide that they're going to take care of their own, rather than the poor class having to steal it from the rich class? Whenever the rich class decide that they're going to finally open up and help the poor class, then is only whenever we might start to see a perfect union. And it's not got nothing to do with a black and white or a red and yellow thing. It's got to do with a right or wrong thing. That's exactly what it's got to do with. It's got to do with greed, and it's got to do with people, greedy, selfish people that sit on TV and watch people starving to death every day over in places like Africa, or they watch almost 3 million people held hostage in concentration camps over in places like Syria, and they refuse to give a damn dime. Or if they do give, they give up to their 10% of whatever that they're earning today, and put it in their favorite charity account, regardless whether it's Baptist or Methodist or Church of Christ or Church of God or whoever, and they pretend like this is sufficient according to God, and because it's sufficient according to God towards what God recommends or what God requires, I'm going to go home and I'm going to finish my nails. I'm going to finish cleaning out my boat. I'm going to finish planning for my vacation. I'm going to finish to make sure that my rental property is being taken care of. And I'm going to take care of my I. Greed, 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 greed. This society over here in America is being torn between the poor class and the rich class. Now you can amplify it any way that you want to, and you can try to justify it any way that you want to. But the fact of the matter is, the color of our skin is nothing more than cosmetic. It's nothing more than cosmetic. And there's a lot of people out there, good, sound people, that have tried to make it in society and just didn't get the fair shake. And because they didn't get the fair shake, they're pissed. They're absolutely just horrified by a system that would turn so ugly in basically causing them to become a thief or a bad person. And really and truly, whenever you get to looking at it from their angle, they're absolutely correct. Because whenever we get to the point that not only that we don't care about what's going on in Africa or Syria, but whenever we get to the point that we can no longer take care of our own right here under our doorsteps, then we definitely got a problem. You wonder how come they're pissed to the point that they're wanting to tear down monuments and tear down this and tear down that? You better be glad that that's all they're tearing down for right now, and they're not going to these rich people's homes and taking their boats and taking their RVs and taking their livelihoods away from them. And that will probably be next. Because whenever people wake up to what is going on and what has went on in this unjust system, this broken system, they will survive one way or the other, even at the expense of walking around with a bad name on their plug towel. Even if it means a possibility of getting shot or getting shot at or being marked towards being a thief or a robber or a bad person. We are going to have to awaken in this wake-up call, this movement that's happening right now. Because if we don't, between now and the election, it's going to be not just Chicago that's rearing up its ugly head like it has this weekend with almost 100 shootings. 13 dead this morning. One 7-year-old little girl dead. It's not just going to be Chicago that's rearing up its ugly head. It's going to be Minnesota. It's going to be Washington. It's going to be Portland, Oregon. It's going to be San Diego and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Houston and Dallas and Albuquerque and places out in Arizona and places all over this countryside pertaining to people shooting and killing. Atlanta, Miami, Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, South Carolina, North Carolina, Charlotte, Raleigh, North Carolina, Knoxville, Nashville, Chattanooga, Memphis, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Indiana, Lexington, Kentucky, Paducah, Kentucky, Bowling Green, Kentucky, places up in West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C., and of course, let's not forget Boston and Maine and New York and all the above towards what goes on the East Coast. Yes, This has gotten serious, and it's getting more serious. And if we don't get a handle on the seriousness of this, it's only going to fester and grow to be worse and worse and worse. Once more, the people in this area didn't want to support a ministry that supported global utopia and peace and prosperity. All these churches around here in western Tennessee, going from Memphis to Pickwick, all the way up to Union City, all the way up to Clarksville, Tennessee, and all the little towns and communities in between. I literally wore out 3 automobiles passing out material from one church building to another church building to another church building. They listened, but they didn't react. They didn't respond. They didn't move. They didn't support. They stood idly by with their hands tucked up underneath their rear ends. And now we're in the position that we're in because of what's went on. This rebellion that began all the way in 1989, whenever I first stood out into the eyes of the public. And these officials in this area, they know damn good and well what has occurred. And they're still remaining silent. They're still retaliating by not being on target towards admitting to the truth. They know that not only did they not support the ministry, but they know that they either sat back idly by towards allowing for the ministry to become attacked, or they themselves was attacking the ministry. And they know it. I'm talking judges, lawyers, commissioners, mayors of these little rinky-dink towns around here. Law enforcement people. Not counting your preachers, your deacons, and your regular old Joes. Your money people, your farmers, your well-to-do pillars of the society. Sat back and allowed for this to turn into what it's turned into. They should all be ashamed. It's a disgrace towards what has occurred. And there's no doubt that Donald Trump has walked into a not a honey hole, but he's walked into a fester of a cesspool of things that are breaking down and being collapsing right before his very eyes, and there's absolutely nothing that the man could do because of previous administrations that have failed to do their jobs. They have failed to put in the proper safeguards. They have abandoned us. They have allowed for these jobs to be sent out of the United States towards going south to places like Honduras or Mexico or Cuba or places all over the world to where we can't even compete. You know, the very TV that you're looking at right there was less than $300 from Walmart. It may tear up and go bad tomorrow. And if it does, I've got my money's worth out of it. But I've had the thing now since I moved back here in 2014. So that TV that you're looking at right now is basically about 7 years old. For $300. At that time, whenever that TV was purchased, the labor force was so high in America, you couldn't manufacture the TV for $300, much less box it up, crate it up, send it out, and sell it for $300 and still have any room for profit. But those people over in China could. They made that TV and put it together and put all the components together. Probably a little less than $100, maybe a little more than $100. And by the time they freighted it and brought it over here on a big boat, it jacked the price up to probably about $150. Walmart, a retail store, buys it for $150, and they put a price tag on it for $289, hoping that they're basically going to double their money. make 100% off of their investment. That's how retail goes. It don't matter if it's a TV, don't matter if it's a lamp, don't matter if it's a shirt. That's the reason why whenever they go on sale, and they usually ask for a 40% discount, they're still coming out and still making money off of a 40% sale. It's only until whenever they go beyond 50% that they take a chance on not making no money off of that sale. We know how the retail grows. We know how the car industry survives. But right now we're talking about something different. We're talking about the fairness for the poor man, not just the wealthy man, not just the conglomerates, not just the rich, but right now we're talking about the poor people, and we're talking about the things that's going on in society right now. Not just a black and white issue, but a fair, what's right issue. I can understand the reason why these people feel the way that they feel. I don't agree with getting violent and tearing up stuff. We've been vandalized right here at 291 Thompson Road towards people not agreeing or not appreciating towards what David and I was trying to venture out into the eyes of the public towards putting our statements out to the general public around here. We've been vandalized 3 or 4 different times. And that's the part that a lot of these heathens don't understand. It's one thing to voice your opinion. It's one thing not to support an industry or a group or a private enterprise. It's one thing for you not to want to talk good about somebody. And it's another thing to deliberately jab them and poke at them and disrespect them. Especially on the level of becoming violent and tearing their stuff up. I don't agree with how that they're tearing down these monuments and tearing down these statues. Besides that, you're not going to be, but you're still not attacking the problem. The problem is justice pertaining to fairness. And I'm just not talking about the courts. I'm talking about what goes on in our everyday world, in our everyday life. How come this person can live in a $2 million home, drive a $100,000 car, have a $50,000 boat, and live in 2 different homes and have all the successes you could dream of, while another person right beside him is literally starving to death and she don't have enough money to feed her 2 children? You call that fairness? You call that justice? I call it insaneness.
Let's talk for a second about... Yeah, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think Eddie's exactly right. And where it begins, where the work of reconciliation begins in my faith tradition, is with the confession of sin. You actually say that I have followed too much the and desires of my own hearts.
Then where's the rich people that's admitting to their wrongs? They want the 99%ers to face off in their court systems towards misbehavior and us getting branded towards being criminals, trying to criminalize us. But yet now, how are we supposed to survive if the rich ain't coming off of the billfold towards sharing the wealth, or giving people the opportunity to get rich like other people has in other nations? It's out of balance. It's out of focus. And they know it.
And what Americans who look like me have to do is acknowledge that for more than 250 years, we have followed the devices and desires of our own hearts at the expense of the hearts of all while professing hypocritically that we were in fact doing it for everybody. And so what Dr. King called us to do is to actually bring the ideal into the realm of the real. When you can go back and look and watch the March on Washington speech, which in many ways is kind of an ur-text of modern America. It's the moment at which Dr. King became a modern founding father. And it was not just him. There were enormous tributaries of sacrifice and blood and toil and sacrifice that led into that moment. He talks about the words of the Declaration of Independence. He talks about my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. But whose country is it? My country, 'tis of thee. What we have to do in the country is find a way to conduct ourselves one toward another so that people of all kinds, of every kind, will say, this is my country, 'tis of thee. And the best definition of a nation I've ever run across, and even the Princeton guys probably appreciate this, is from St. Augustine. He said that I don't want to pull the, Princeton is basically a Presbyterian institution. They don't like to talk about it much anymore, but it is. I always think takes all the fun out of it. If it's predestined, what's the fun? Augustine defined a nation as a multitude of rational beings united by the common objects of their love. It's a wonderful definition. Multitude of rational beings united by the common object of their love. So it means that we have to be reasonable, we have to be rational, we have to follow data, we have to believe the evidence of our own eyes, but we have to be united by what we love in common. And ideally, what we should love in common, the three of us and everybody else, should be equality of opportunity, justice before the law, the primacy of reason, the efficacy of grace. That's what this country should be about. It's not, but the part of the work of America, the project of America, is to try.
I've spent a lot of time, I would say, thinking about that idea of grace and how we get back to that after such a tumultuous and difficult year. And it does seem, and we mentioned this at the top, that many Americans seem to be saying this direction that we've been going in this year, it's not the way that we want to go. And there are a lot of reasons for that. The coronavirus, obviously the incredibly tragic killing of George Floyd and other Black Americans, but the fact that people seem to recognize that is not a direction that we want to go in, people seem to be looking for some unity, gives me a little bit of hope that maybe we can start to at least keep or turn ourselves back into the right direction, I would say. Jon Meacham, Eddie Glaude Jr., thank you both so much for your time, and happy 4th of July. President Trump, meanwhile, says coronavirus will, quote, just disappear. That is an actual quote from this week. Coming up, what the 1918 flu pandemic can teach us about the dire consequences of a hands-off approach to a health crisis. KCDC, back after this.
Has tuberculosis just disappeared? Has AIDS just disappeared? Has diabetes just disappeared? Has high blood pressure or other health crisis, has these things just up and disappeared? This may very well be something that they don't even find a penicillin for. This may be something that we have to live with for years. And as far as I'm concerned, this has been a wake-up call this year in 2020. This has been a wake-up call towards not only our health, but the way that we handle crisis and how that we're looked upon by other parts of the world. It was Ronald Reagan that made gestures of what would they think of the American people if we planted a time capsule in the White House, dug a hole and buried it, and dug it back up 1,000 years from now. What would they think of us 1,000 years from now in comparison to what they think of us today? Well, in the direction that we've been going, they're probably not going to be that satisfied in the American way of life, pertaining to how that we've been cutting and jabbing and stealing and conniving and not giving other people opportunities towards being able to make successes out of their lives. 1,000 years from now, they're liable to be saying some pretty harsh things about the American people and what the American people was doing to each other over here. That was the whole primary principle or point that Ronald Reagan was making about the time capsule. Good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us as we're struggling, competing, fighting, all for that brass ring towards becoming successful in life that some people just don't never get the breaks, and why others are basically born with a silver spoon in their mouths.